Good morning, and welcome to Listen In, Community, Conversations, Connection. This is WOWD-LP, Tacoma Park, 94.3 FM, and you can find us streaming at tacomaradio.org. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Mairi Rothman, who is a midwife here in Tacoma Park, and she's been doing a lot of thinking about listening in, both from a personal perspective and from what she thinks is happening in our culture. So, Mairi, tell me, what does it mean? Well, first, tell me, what does it mean to listen in? What does listening in mean to you?
Hearing the voice that comes from within you without all the noise that is provided by your upbringing or your friends or all the shoulds that you have in your head.
Yes.
You're just hearing the pure inner voice.
And you had shared with me earlier that there were certain individuals when you were growing up that helped you learn how to listen in. You want to tell our listeners a little bit about that, about your Aunt Gerry?
Well, I was thinking about that, the fact that my dad always taught us to believe in ourselves, and that if you had an inner hunch if you were about to do something and you had an inner hunch that said, don't do it, that you should listen to that was a voice of wisdom, not to be ignored, or to be ignored at your own peril.
Yeah.
And he had a very strong expectation of us to do the right thing. And that was sort of a moral thing. And then my Aunt Gerry, in a different way, also encouraged listening to your inner voice, but from a more mystical standpoint. She thought that it wasn't just the voice of your own self within you that knows the right from wrong. It was the voice of our ancestors and the collective unconscious and that kind of thing.
Fascinating.
So the combination of those two things was a pretty good foundation for listening in.
Great. And then just before we came on air, you were sharing with me some of your thoughts about listening in and our culture. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, my mom actually used to talk to me about the fact that as women, our culture encourages us to ignore that inner voice when we're dealing with our children, when we're dealing with our own desires, and so on a range of things, including not listening to the part of you that's unhappy and just always having a smile on your face and putting your best foot forward and keeping your chin up and soldiering on when you don't feel great. And then also things like letting a baby cry it out, that a lot of parenting books will tell you should just, put in earplugs or something and just let the baby cry it out. And what you're really doing when you do that is you're ignoring this inner voice that's screaming at you, pick up your baby, and telling yourself, no, that voice is not right, and I should ignore it because the person that's right is the person that wrote this book that I read and is telling me how to parent my child when I really know how to do it internally.
Right. So lots of opportunities for listening into your own inner wisdom, particularly if you are a parent, but all of us can find lots of opportunities to listen in. And, of course, I've spoken with a number of other guests as well about some of the things that get in the way of listening in. So what would you say gets in the way of your listening in, Mairi?
I think the thing that gets in most of our way, more than anything, is what I think of as the shoulds. What you're supposed to do or supposed to think, or how things should be in this nebulous general way that gets in the way of you hearing that voice, things that stand between us and our own inner voice. Trying to think of a good example. Well, one example would be, as a midwife, we're taught certain things that make sense in a general way, but when dealing with the individual, sometimes don't really apply. For instance, we're taught that it's a good idea to suggest that a woman change her position every half hour or so, because that helps the baby spiral on down. And so you could get caught up in the idea, oh, it's been half an hour, I need to tell her to move, instead of listening to her and listening to your own inner voice that's telling you she knows what she's doing and doesn't need you to tell her what to do.
Right, yeah. So I imagine there have been many opportunities to listen in as a midwife, and do you also have the opportunity to encourage the women that you're working with?
I think that's one of our major roles. Midwife means with woman in Old English, and I think that's the primary thing that we do, is to be with the woman who is doing this huge and powerful and sacred work, to help quiet all the noise and create a space where she can listen in and hear everything that she needs to hear.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, the midwife has to be willing to do that for herself as well. One time, one of my kids asked me, what's the primary thing you need to be a good midwife? And I replied without any hesitation, patience, because there's a tremendous amount of waiting that happens at a birth for everyone concerned, except the mom, who's not waiting. She's doing,
right,
and everyone else is waiting. But when you're waiting, you have a lot of opportunity to listen in and to observe someone listening in the most powerful way possible.
Right.
So in that way, we can really learn from our clients, because they do it so well, and we can learn to follow their example.
Yeah. So if you just tuned in, this is WOWD-LP, Tacoma Park, 94.3 FM, and you've tuned in to Listen In Show. And we're here first and third Wednesday mornings at 8 a.m. And what we're doing is we're having community conversations where we connect with a lot of different people in our community. And next time I'll be talking with Kate Stewart, our mayor. Looking forward to that. But I want to get back to something Mairi said about listening in, and the idea that came to me was, and I think you mentioned this also earlier, about gestating and letting things gestate. And I think our gentle challenge for this time around will be for you to spend some time quietly and think about, what are you birthing? What might you be bringing into the world new today? And of course, I don't mean that in literal sense, but I think
that works too.
We're always on the cusp of something, right? Or we can be.
Yeah, I think we're continually giving birth to our next new self.
Right. So do you have particular tools or practices that you can share with our listeners, tips for how to listen in when things get a little crazy?
I think one thing that needs to happen for a lot of us to listen in is to be still. And it's really hard to be still in this age. We are always on the move. And if we're physically sitting still, we're moving our little fingers across the screen and checking our email and checking our Facebook and all of that. In order to really listen in, you need to stop all that. You need to stop everything and just sit and look inward. And I would like to have more opportunity to do that, especially when when you're moving towards a transition in your life. You need to do that a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why pregnant women need a lot of alone time, which is especially challenging if you already have a number of children, but very necessary. And I think we all have that need to have time alone, to ponder, to gestate, as you said.
Yeah. And also, Mairi had mentioned to me earlier that though it's important to make time to listen in and be still on your own, that for many of us, we're able to really hear our own inner wisdom when we speak to someone who really gets us.
Yes, and I think you bring up a really good point that one of the ways that children begin to know how to listen to themselves is when other people listen to them.
Yes.
If other people won't listen to you, then I think you start feeling like, why should I listen to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I have an opportunity to see a lot of early parenting in my work, and I'm always so thrilled when I see parents, the child tugging at the sleeve, and the parent, instead of saying, why don't you go play with your blocks or whatever, that they stop and turn to them and say, I'm trying to have a conversation with Mari, but what is it that you want to say? And they actually focus for a minute and listen. And interestingly, what happens is that child that was pulling at the sleeve and nagging, once they get 60 seconds of direct attention, they usually are satisfied and move on to whatever they were doing next. But we need to be listened to from the time we're born. And if others don't listen to us, then we're not as likely to listen to ourselves.
Right. Well, tell me if you can come up with some stories. What are some stories about listening in, maybe with your Aunt Gerry or with your mom or your dad?
Wow. Trying to think of stories of my family for me is like a bunch of people trying to get out of an elevator at the same time. They all bump into each other, and it's hard for one to emerge.
Well, don't overthink it. Just grab one.
Well, I remember that my original career was as a dancer and choreographer, and after having a baby and having amazing guidance from doula who helped me through my first birth, I decided to become a childbirth educator because she was a Bradley teacher. And so I did that, and then I ended up going to a birth that was not my own, and it was kind of a game changer for me. I just realized that, I've heard other people compare it to alcoholics who say that when they had their first drink, they knew they were sunk. I kind of felt like that at my first birth. I thought, oh boy, I'm going to need to do this again. And then I started reading everything I could get my hands on about midwifery. And I started saying to people all the time, boy, if I had another life to live, I would do like Mary Breckenridge and ride across the cricks and hollers on my horse and deliver babies around the countryside. And but I never really thought about it seriously until I had lunch with my dad one day, and I was saying this same old song, and he said, you keep talking about it, why don't you do it? And I said, well, it's expensive. I have 3 little children, or actually 2 little children at the time. And, it costs a lot of money to go back to school and everything. And he said, oh, well, if it's just about money, you can always get money if you need it, which is something that I've always believed, too. I have this vision that there are all these little pockets of money all over the world just waiting for someone to ask for it in the right way. But after that conversation with him, when he said, well, if that's what you keep thinking about and that's what you want to do, why don't you just do it? And I had about a month of time where I was really depressed, which is very unusual for me. I'm never depressed. That's not my natural state of being. And I realized by the end of it that when I really listened in, the reason I was depressed is because I realized that I had to do this and that it was going to be really hard.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I just had this sort of feeling of inevitability that, that you have when you're at the top of the hill on a roller coaster and you're about to go down a big, long, scary hill. But you're going, you can't really do anything about it.
You're
right?
already on that trajectory.
Yeah. So, but that, when I had lunch with my dad that day, that was a pretty crucial turning point. And he was basically saying, you're telling this story to everyone. How come you're not listening to your own story?
It's funny that you say that because when I was in yoga yesterday, I often say in my next life I'm going to be a yoga teacher. Mm. And so when I was in yoga the other day, I thought, okay, well, you could take a yoga teacher training now. You might like it, you might not. But so I guess I would encourage our listeners to think about, what do you say to people that I'm going to do, not just in the next life, but what am I going to do when I have the time? What am I going to do when I have the money? What am I going to do when the kids are gone? What am I going to do when ...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people often ask me, when is going to be a good time for me to start a family? And I always say, if you're going to wait until it's convenient and affordable, you're not going to have any children. You got to go when that inner voice says, I just want to do it really badly. And, one person that was really an inspiration to me when I was trying to become a midwife was my 3-year-old daughter, Sadie, who has always been just the most determined person, who always listens to herself. And I just really want to be like her when I grow up. But when she was 3 years old, she was trying to take a big armload of stuffed animals up into the attic. And she would drop one, and when she leaned over to pick it up, she'd drop another one, and she was getting very frustrated. And I finally said to her, hey, why don't you take 2 trips? You can take half an armload and then the other half. And she said, I don't want to take 2 trips. And I said, okay, but that looks hard. And she stopped what she was doing and looked right at me and said, it's hard, but it's doable. And, that's kind of what came back to me when I was thinking about the whole going back to school thing, is I thought, well, it's hard, but it's doable, and I'm going to do it. And speaking of yoga teachers, my daughter Sadie is a yoga teacher.
Wow.
And she's really a yogi at this point. It's become a kind of a spiritual path for her too. But she decided that she wanted to be a yoga teacher. And next thing I knew, she was completing the course and teaching yoga at several studios around town. So,
and I will mention that sometime in January, I will be, I believe it's in the third Wednesday in January, I'll be speaking with Kath Meadows, who is a yoga teacher at a women's prison. So you'll want to tune in for that. So this is WOWD LP 94.3 Tacoma Park, and you've tuned in to Listen In Show. And I'm speaking with Mairi Rothman. And Mairi is a midwife here in Tacoma Park. And she's been telling some stories about how she learned to listen in her life and through people in her family, from her elders to her children. And we invite your stories. Feel free to reach out to us at listeninshow.org. So, Mairi, I knew you actually when you were beginning to start your practice here in Tacoma Park. And I would imagine that there were a lot of voices that were suggesting that perhaps
I was crazy.
What you heard. Yes, I was trying to be gentle about it. Yes. So tell me about that experience and how does one move forward when were there a few people who believed that you weren't crazy?
Well, yeah, luckily for me, my husband just said, if that's what you want to do, go for it. Mm-hmm. I'm behind you. And he always has been. And in fact, he has a bumper sticker on his truck that says it takes a real man to be married to a midwife, because you never know when your partner is going to be there or not be there, your partner and co-parent. And he's always been willing to step in and pick up the slack. And I think that is something that we really have done for each other, is to encourage each other to listen to that inner voice and go with it. Mm-hmm. But it took a village to make me into a midwife, because I did have small children while I went back to school, and my dad and stepmother, my friends, including you, and my husband were incredibly supportive and kept me flowing along really well. But mostly I think that what kept me going was that inner voice and that feeling compelled to move in that direction.
Yeah. Now, I know that another important thing in your life is singing. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you feel like there's any connection between singing and listening in.
Yeah, I do feel like my inner voice is somewhere between a soprano and an alto. And sometimes I have inner voices that sing in harmony with each other.
And other times? At other times, do they not sing in harmony?
You mean, do I have two conflicting voices?
Yeah.
This is what I think. When I have two conflicting voices, I think one of them's mine and one of them's coming from outside.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's hard to tell which one is which.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly who mentioned this to me, but they were saying when you hear a critical voice, you might ask yourself, whose voice is that?
Mm-hmm. But I think for me, I don't have so much of a conflict between critical voices and supportive voices. For me, the conflict is more often between fear and determination, because I think I am prone to a little bit of anxiety. So, for instance, if I'm hesitating to do something, it's hard to sometimes judge, is that because I'm having an intuition about something that could go wrong?
Right.
Or am I just, being fearful for no reason? I'm one of those people that there is a quiet voice always going in my head saying, what if I step off this curb and a car comes out of nowhere? Or what if this or what if that? And as a parent especially, I can remember watching my toddler getting ready to go down a slide, and in one part of my brain I'm hearing, I'm seeing the child fall and hearing the sirens and seeing the blood, and the other part of my brain I'm saying, good honey, you're doing great. And so those are definitely conflicting voices, but maybe it's true that with age comes some wisdom and being able to tell the difference between the voices that are coming from fear that holds you back and the voices that are sensible fear that you should pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Now, you may have mentioned this as well, but a number of my other guests have mentioned that when they have conflicting voices in their heads, usually in our heads, to then go to the body or to the heart, and sometimes things can become much more clear then. One
of the things that kind of has been a guiding mantra to me, I learned from an Ecuadorian healer that I consulted for a while about 10 years ago, and one of the things she said to me when I was wrestling with the decision about one of my kids, she said, you can never go wrong by being too loving. And that is a really great piece of guidance for me when I'm trying to decide whether to go with my gut or my heart or my head. Just that you can never go wrong by being too loving.
I think that's something that would be particularly helpful if you're feeling angry. What would I do if I were being more loving? Mm-hmm. And Mairi had mentioned to me that she sometimes, even though her dad and her Aunt Gerry are not with us here on this physical plane any longer, that she often thinks, what would Aunt Gerry do? Or what would Dad do? And I would invite you to think about who are the voices, whether they're here or not, that you believe to be wise or that you believe can help you. And if you're not able to ask them in person, then just pause for a moment. I think the pausing is something we want to reemphasize. And it may be helpful to do something that centers you. Mairi mentioned taking baths. For some people, walking is very centering. And for me, swimming. I've mentioned a number of times that I swim out all my problems. So I have to swim for at least a half an hour because the first 5 or 10 minutes are working out the problems, and then the last bit can be more meditative. So notice what's meditative for you, and that doesn't have to be anything that's traditional like sitting meditation, but it can be chopping vegetables or what other things do you do that, Mairi, that...
Well, I am really fortunate that I have a small circle of very wise people that are still with us that I can talk to. My sister Leah is a couple of really good friends who I can count on to both to give me their own wisdom, but also to reflect back to me what I'm thinking or saying that I'm not hearing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, did you hear yourself say blah, blah, blah? So it's great to have a little posse you can check in with.
Yeah.
People that you know are going to help you see things the way that you want to.
So think about who are those people that help you to listen in. And if you haven't spoken to them in a while, this might be a good opportunity to shoot them an email, give them a phone call. This is WOWD LP 94.3 FM in Tacoma Park. And thank you so much, Mairi, for being with us. And next time, I was just looking for the date, on the 16th, on November 16th, I'll be speaking with Kate Stewart. And then in the new year, I'll be speaking with Joe Uline and Kath Meadows, who I mentioned earlier. I will also be speaking with Kyra Jewell, who used to be a monk, and I'm not sure about the date of that yet, but we have a lot of good programming still coming up, and also you can listen to some of our previous shows at listeninshow.org. And thank you so much, Mairi, for being with us today. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
I guess just that don't let the noise get in your way. Just listen in.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. This was fun.